Hey there, how you doing? So this is the 2-week forecast taking you from the new moon in Cancer on the 25th of June right the way through to the full moon in Capricorn on the 10th of June 2025. And this is a really kind of jam-packed one. In particular, we've got Uranus changing signs and going into the sign of Gemini. Now, the last time he did that was in 19. So he went into the sign of Gemini in 1941, and he went in 3 times. So he went in, then he kind of went back over that 0 degree Gemini, when he retrograded, and then he went back forwards in May 1942. So he went in August, 7th of August 1941, and finally went in for good on May 1942. Now we've got something like that going on this year. So he's going in on the 7th of July, and then he'll be back in April of 2026. Now, these 84-year cycles are cycles of consciousness. And so, we are coming into a whole new time, in terms of how we are seeing what's going on around us. Our consciousness is changing. There's definitely some surprises. Uranus is definitely a planet of surprises. Back then, there was the advance of Germany into the Soviet Union. Something called the Atlantic Charter was brought up. There was a lot of Pacific tensions between Japan and Australia. Also, the last time that Uranus went over this point, the WAAC, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. Sorry, I've got to look at my notes. That was founded on the day that Uranus went into Gemini for the last time in 1942, giving military status to women. So this was a really sort of tumultuous time. And, I'm not saying it's going to be tumultuous again. It certainly looks like it is, given all of the outer planetary positions right now, everything, being right at the end of one sign, at the beginning of another. This is a really interesting time. So, yeah, that's just one of many things, but that is the biggest thing. So, Uranus is going into Gemini on the 7th. But we've also got Neptune going retrograde. Now, he's going to be retrograde for 158 days, I believe, literally just over 5 months. And during this time, Neptune will send us more deeply into inner work. Neptune can bring up some real strong needs for us to do our spiritual like to work on our spiritual reflection. He helps us to examine things. However, he also brings with him this kind of air of confusion. The path to spiritual enlightenment isn't necessarily that straightforward with Neptune, because there are veils of reality, veils within veils within veils. But, when any planet goes retrograde, we are pulling that planetary energy inward. We're processing it not out there but in here. And actually, I think Neptune retrograde can help us really see what's going on for us, so that we can absolutely see the truths that we've hidden from ourselves. Those obscure truths can be revealed, which I think is going to be quite helpful. So if you've got, an escapism is a really strong theme for Neptune. And if you've got a very strong Neptune, you'll probably find that escapism has been part of your pattern in your life. I know it has for me. I've got Neptune in a conjunction with my North Node, Mars, and also in a square to Jupiter, Ceres, and the Moon. So, my Neptune's pretty strong, and it helps us to break those false perceptions that we might have of ourselves. We get to see our pattern, like we lift up that cover really internally. We really get to feel it and see it. And so I think we can get a much stronger intuition, a much stronger awareness, and you'll be able to break, hopefully, the hold of whatever it is that you're escaping from right now. And that can go for things like addictions as well, because, Neptune can bring about, our dependency on things, because it helps us to feel good. So this is a time of inner work. So we've got, Uranus going into Gemini, signaling there's a lot of outer consciousness stuff coming at us. And then there is this deepening inner work that's coming on, which is really also important. Now, during this time, we've also got Mercury going into the sign of Leo. And as he does that, he's going to be making aspects to Saturn and Neptune. So there's going to be a trine energy there, which is going to be quite helpful. And he's going to go into opposition with Pluto. So Mercury, the planet of communication, thought, transactions, is going to be working very strongly with Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto. That's in the first part of this 2-week period. And then in the second part of this 2-week period, we've got Venus going into the sign of Gemini. when she does that, just before she does that, she makes a conjunction to Uranus, and then she's making a sextile to Saturn and Neptune, and also Pluto. So to me, I think, Mercury and Venus are, our hard workers in this period of time. Mercury's kind of bringing up the conversations, the communications, and helping us move around and to talk to the right people at the right time. And so that's very much part of this first week. And in the second part of the week, Venus is coming into her strength, and hers is about relating and sharing and I just think relatedness in all ways. So as I see this, the first part of this 2-week period is stirring things up, and then the second part of this 2-week period is kind of settling things down, which I think is kind of interesting. So what I'm going to do in this video, I mean, this might be enough for you actually, like this just first 5 minutes. But what I want to do is pace you through what it looks like during this particular period in time, because we start with this very strong new moon, which is quite shocking and awakening, and possibly like bringing up this call into action kind of energy. And then we're leading towards this very, very strong full moon, which is really getting us to see the hard work involved. And we might be feeling a little bit heavy around that time, so I want to do it. I'm going to be looking at the diary version, talking about the moon phase, and I'm sure there's lots of other things that are going to come forward as I go through it. So if you're up for that, join me right now. What I'm going to do is just first of all say a big thank you to everybody that sponsors my channel in all the various ways that you do. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So the first bit then, from new moon to full moon. So like the new moon, first of all, I mean, you may well have seen my new moon in Cancer video, where I talk about the asteroids, chaos and truth, and also the fact that we've got these very powerful 2 Yods happening at the same time as the new moon. I mean, it's an emotional new moon. It's in the sign of Cancer. Jupiter's nearby. Mercury's also in the sign of Cancer. So there is this seed of emotional growth for sure, and a real sort of intense need for growth. Almost like if we have this feeling of intense spiritual growth, we'll feel safe, because obviously safety is a huge theme for Cancer. And with all this energy, I would say emotional honesty is something that's really coming up. Now, given that truth is there, asteroid truth is, wound up in this new moon sort of connection, I would also say that our emotional honesty is something that's, it could be quite challenging, because there's chaos there as well. So what I think is coming up with this new moon is this sense of the chaos that comes up when we see ourselves and can be truthful to ourselves, and possibly truthful to the people around us. We grow up in a society whereby little white lies are okay. And we've grown up believing about Father Christmas, the Easter Bunny, and all things like that. And that sows the seeds that it's okay to have these little white lies here, there, and everywhere. And so, I think a lot of life has been, it's been covered with these like little half truths all along. And I really think around the time of the new moon, not only will you become very conscious of where you have these half truths, and then you're laying your life, like the groundwork for your life is laid from these half truths. And then obviously if you're continuing down a road because of one half truth or a couple of half truths, it'll take you off your path. So I really think this new moon is bringing us this seed of emotional growth, but with it comes self-responsibility. The idea that we might see ourselves and realize that some things haven't maybe been that open. We haven't been that open. I haven't been that open. I can see where where maybe I have covered what's really going on, to be nice. And it brings up a seed of chaos with it as this comes out, as your truth comes out. So that's where we're starting from. But this new moon, at the time of the new moon, it's dark. There is no illuminated, like there's no light coming in. Anything that we get from the moon is reflected. So at the time of the new moon, yes, it's a seed point. Like we are emptying our lives clean. We're kind of letting go of things leading up to the new moon, and we're tightening things up. We're getting quieter, a lot more peaceful. I mean, that's the ideal recipe for coming into the time of the new moon. And from this is the light is going to come back over the next 2 weeks. You'll see, as we go through the different moon phases, we're coming more and more into the light, where everything that's going on is so easy to spot. But right now, at the time of the new moon, it's a place where you're only really finding things out through your direct sort of self-talk. You are needing to go inside to be able to sense what's going on. So it's a deeply, deeply intuitive time. It's a fantastic time to lay down seeds of new intentions, in particular new intentions that have to do with family, enriching your family, feeling that sense of emotional growth. You don't necessarily have to take big steps towards it. I always think around the time of the new moon, it's best kept in your imagination. So you hold the vibration of what it is you're wishing to create. And then as you go through the week, we get to this first quarter phase on the 2nd of July, exactly halfway through. And this is a point in time where what we're imagining and bringing forwards with our intention, we're encouraged to take a step forwards. Like if you think something enough, it will cause you to come into an action. A new action may pop into your brain and you're like, that's my next step. And so around the time of the first quarter, the second, third, fourth, I actually think the 5th is a great day, because on that day, the moon will be in a lovely trine with the sun and Jupiter. And also connecting to Vesta and also Juno. So this could be really, really great time. And so this is when you're starting to get a little bit more outwardly facing on what it is that you want to create. And then as you get closer and closer to the time of the full moon, the energies I guess your intention plus action is whipping things up into a frenzy. And so lots of things are coming into that sort of manifestation stage. And then as you're coming up to the full moon, we're really getting the full whammy. It kind of wallops us in the face. We get that full illumination, and it's a time when you tend to get a lot more problems cropping up, and you tend to have a lot less patience. From my perspective as an empath, I feel around the time of the full moon that it's a time when I can't really sleep easily because there's too much light in the sky. I'm feeling a lot of things from the past seem to pop into my mind. And there's a sort of restlessness, it's really quite stirring, a stirring time. So I always think how you get on around the time of the full moon is really showing you what's happened in the last 2-week period. If you've used that time really beautifully and been quite purposeful about what you're wanting to create, and also letting go of some of the things that maybe are detracting from that creation, then around the time of the full moon it's great. But if you're not very discerning as everything is illuminating and getting stronger and stronger and faster, I think you can whip so much into a frenzy, like this kind of, I keep doing this, it's like a tornado. You're dragging so many things into that point of creation, that field that you're in, that it can just get a little overwhelming. So it's a fascinating stage, this waxing moon phase, because it starts from really strong inner reflection, and then it just becomes, it feels like it may well be slightly out of control. And then of course the next moon phase, from full moon to new moon, we're slowly calming down again, but it's a growth phase. It's a fantastic time to, I think, have your hair cut if you're wanting your hair to grow back thicker and longer. It's a great time, around this point, to be like tending to your garden and sowing things, things that you want to grow quickly, because it's a growth phase. So use this for everything that you're wanting to grow, especially the emotional side. Now, when we do come to the full moon, and there will be a separate full moon broadcast on this, there are lots of big patterns, and some of them we'll see, because I'll be showing you a picture of the full moon right at the end of this. But there's a very tight T-square with Chiron, and Chiron is, the wounded healer, but I also think he's the teacher and the coach that shows up. And that may well be, that teacher may be you, you might be teaching yourself, you might be here to guide others. Whatever is happening is this T-square. At the time of the full moon, we've got the sun in one part of the chart and the moon exactly opposite. And then Chiron is like in between the two of them at a square. To me, around this time, we are all being called to be better, or to find our best way of expressing ourselves. Like when someone says, put your best foot forward or something like that, like take your best step forward. I've got it wrong. I'm always getting stuck on these little sayings and things, but it's like, it's important to put yourself out there in the best light. Put your best pulling pants on. How people wear their best clothes if they think they might be going out and meeting up with somebody. It's like dress for success. This to me is a time when we can all rise up quite a bit, even though it's a full moon and full moons can be chaotic. This T-square with Chiron could be bringing us into our vulnerability, but at the same time, Chiron, when he dealt with his issues, the things that made him vulnerable in mythology, he became the master of them. So, this is an opportunity for us to surprise ourselves, to leap forwards in mastery. It's by no means, sort of defining us as going into a vulnerability we can't come out of. I always think the energies around us can be used, if they seem harsh, there is also a positive offset. I really think the way we focus, what we're deciding to be in that day, I think that really determines how you're using the energy of the planets on that particular time. So anyway, let's have a look at the diary of this particular moment in time. So from a diary format, you can see that there are some busy moments and some quiet moments. So here we've got the new moon in Cancer on the 25th, and then you've got the full moon on the 10th of July on Thursday. That's the midway point, the first quarter point. Thursday the 26th has got 3 sextiles, and it's also the day when Mercury goes into Leo. Now on that day, we've got Mercury in a sextile with Uranus, which is making us lightning fast at processing information. We've also got the sun in a sextile with Mars, which is, I think, giving us the courage and the confidence to really try something new. And then we've also got Venus in a sextile with the North Node, which I think is helping us to relate to our life in a much better way. There's a lovely relatedness. And it could be a great time, when we might want to meet with friends or someone special. And yes, on that day, Mercury is going into the sign of Leo. As he comes out of the sign of Cancer, I think there is a need for us to be a lot more upbeat, a lot more playful, a lot more creative with the way we're talking. Mercury in the sign of Cancer can really get us talking about the deeper meaningfuls and the emotions of things. And I think as Mercury goes into the sign of Leo, he's almost saying, okay, we've just had this really emotional new moon. Let's start to kind of play with the energy a little bit. We don't have to hold on to the emotional payload so much. It can become emotional terrorism, and we don't want that. So Mercury going into Leo is fantastic. It's quite clear. Now, I'm only mentioning the biggest aspects, so I'm not mentioning all these tiny little micro aspects or the moon aspects aside from the full moon and the new moon. So it's very, very quiet on Friday. And then on Saturday, Mercury is making an exact trine to Saturn and an exact trine to Neptune. So this is a time when we can get very, I think we can have some very deep levels of clarity and decision making. Mercury in a trine to Saturn is going to be helping us. It's kind of like an architect. It sees the overall design. It's going to work with the design beautifully. If you've got something to deliver on that day, which I know my friend Jenny and Bo have, they've got this lovely presentation, which hopefully I'm going to be going to. Hey, Jenny, if you're watching. Mercury trine Saturn is going to help you find the right words at the right time in the right way. You're not going to be overdoing it. You're going to be just right. It's a bit like, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Mercury trine Saturn is just right, really just right. It's purposeful, practical, and just perfect. But then Mercury trine Neptune is giving us this, I think, this ability to also describe things in a more spiritual way as well. So, we can have the clear picture, and then we can have the higher level, like that sort of finishing touch, like someone has their hair done and they might put that tiny little bit of gloss on top, like that nice serum that gives it a lovely shine. So Mercury and Neptune is kind of, I think, refining that energy as well. So it's good. I think it's going to be quite helpful to if you're doing anything where you want to deep dive into understanding the reasons for things, and then some self-forgiveness. I think Saturday is quite a good day for doing that. Then the 29th, so Saturday and Sunday are pretty intense. We then got Mercury going into the exact opposition with Pluto. Now, I should also say, with all of these aspects, they're not just, they're exact on the days where I've put them in the diary. However, they're already coming in and passing out. So, this is the moment when it's most intense, but you will be feeling it a little bit coming in and easing off. So the 29th of June is a very strong day with Mercury opposite Pluto. You may well want to speak out on something. Mercury can be a little bit gobby, especially in the sign of Leo, and especially when it's triggered by Pluto. Like, Pluto is quite controlling. And so if you're feeling like there's some kind of manipulation or something controlling coming in, something you're really uncomfortable with, the Mercury aspect is likely to speak up about it. And, Mercury and Pluto, when they're stressed, I think it comes out as sarcasm, like really deep sarcasm. It's like speech that can be slightly derogative, like you're trying to negate somebody with your words. So something to watch out for. On a sort of positive healing aspect side, I would say that Mercury opposite Pluto could bring you up to see maybe that face of yours that maybe you don't know you have, but you do have it. Often I don't think we get to hear what we're really thinking, because we're often around other people. We've got music on the background. There's something going on here, there, and everywhere. There's always distractions around us. And so we sometimes don't often hear our negative sides. But I think on the 29th, if you're still enough and you have a sudden reaction to somebody, I think you can, or something in your life, I think you can dig down and actually find that face or what it is. Like, you can get into the sort of underlying mechanics of it, so that you can kind of pull it apart a bit, tease it apart. Because I think often these sort of slightly threatening and predatory ways of thinking, they've come from a place when we were less secure, less able to manage our environment, maybe when we had patronizing parents, or like school bullies or something like that working around us. And so we have these inner thoughts that we daren't express, because if we were to express it, all of a sudden people would see maybe that actually we can defend ourselves. I actually think sometimes verbal abuse and mental abuse is much stronger than physical abuse. Physical abuse is so you see it and you feel it, it's obvious, but this is underneath the surface. So I really think Saturday and Sunday, when you add both of those in together, I think you can get some really strong work done. And in particular, if you're very hard on yourself, I think this could be very revelatory. I think you can realize how you've been hard on yourself. That's the big thing. If you don't realize you're being hard on yourself, you can never learn not to be hard on yourself. And so I think this will really highlight where that meanness might be, so that you can see where it comes from, see that, yes, it makes sense that it came from there, and kind of forgive yourself and move on. You are much bigger and stronger and more able to look after yourself now than when these original patterns happened. So this is really deep, sort of deep survival stuff. And then we've got this kind of break. I haven't seen this for a long time. There's usually something every other day or so, but then it's relatively calm. So we've got lots of minor aspects happening, and the moon just making the sort of same aspects as usual, but it's relatively calm around this time. Fascinating. And that's Monday to Thursday. And then the 4th of July, which is a huge day, and obviously it's a celebration day for America. So we've got Venus making a conjunction to Uranus. I quite like the energy of Venus and Uranus between the 4th and the 7th. So Venus is coming into a conjunction with Uranus in the last degree of Taurus, 29 degrees Taurus. And this is quite a showy day. It's interesting because I think I did my solstice reading. I mentioned about the Sabian symbol for 29 degrees Taurus. And it was something about kind of showing off and really emphasizing the showiness of things. So it's interesting, this is happening on the 4th of July, a time when people may well show off. So anyway, Venus conjunct Uranus. Venus is obviously, a planet who is known for looking good and smoothing things over and relating. It's about beauty. And it can have a very superficial side. So Venus in a conjunction to Uranus can make the visual things so much bigger. And it can almost force this niceness, force this kind curiosity, this kind consciousness. It can really force it. Now, Venus in a conjunction to Uranus is also quite helpful, I think, because it's starting a new cycle. Whenever planets come together, they're always starting the new cycle until they come back round again. Venus and Uranus, I think, are a cycle of surprising love and conscious love. And the two of those planets together, like relatedness in consciousness, relatedness with surprise and spontaneity and change. So there is this kind of changing friendship energy that's coming up on the 4th of July, which I think could be really, really spectacular. And it could be also a little bit scary. You may well feel that things are changing a bit too quickly, but I would urge you to see the potential that we might be able to connect in surprising ways. Venus conjunct Uranus, like the related consciousness cycle that we're going on for the next year until Venus next meets with Uranus, I think could take us on a journey of surprising new friendships. And then straight after, Venus is going into the sign of Gemini. Now, she's been in Taurus for quite a while now, and, she's in her element in the sign of Taurus. She's not that strong in the sign of Gemini, but she's very, very social and very, very friendly in the sign of Gemini. So I think the 4th of July is absolutely about creating more friends and feeling this sense of connection and relatedness with people. Now, also on this day, the moon is going into the sign of Scorpio, which will, especially later on the day, on the 4th of July and into the 5th of July, the moon will be coming into a lovely trine with Jupiter and the sun. So I think that's going to really, work by giving us a sense of depth with our friendships and depth around the relationships that we have. And on this day, also after Venus has gone into Gemini and after the moon has gone into Scorpio, we've got Neptune going retrograde, which, like I mentioned right at the start, I think is about us being able to see those obscure truths. They can be revealed, where we can break our own false perceptions, where we can maybe see where we have been escaping, and where we can maybe break its hold. Maybe we don't need that escapism so much. This is a time of incoming inner work. This is quite this is going to be quite interesting, because during this retrograde period, when Neptune goes retrograde, and he'll go direct again on the 10th of December, but during this time, Neptune is going back from Aries and back into the sign of Pisces. Yes, like anything that we've learned, in this brief period since the end of March, in terms of taking control of our spirituality and finding this kind of flourishing understanding of how the world is, we're going to be sort of taking it backwards and reintegrating it into what we already know. It's like sometimes we can move forwards quite fast, but then we need that rest period for it all to sort of fall into place in our unconscious mind, and to almost restructure how we are being. So I see this as being a very, very strong day, the Friday, the 4th of July. And then the 5th is not so much going on, but the 6th, Venus is making her sextile to Saturn and Neptune. So again, any friendships that we're concerned about or wanting to strengthen, I think that's a really strong time. And then on the 7th of July, Monday the 7th, happy birthday to my beloved Carl, by the way, who's turning 60 on that day. My husband, what a strong day. And to all my friends, I've got quite a few friends born on the 7th of July. I can't list them all, but you know who you are, and I love you. So on the 7th of July, Uranus is going into Gemini, and also Venus is making a trine to Pluto. So this is a really, really strong day, you know, from Friday to Monday. You know, I don't know if there's like a big public holiday or something, but I would say that as we're looking at this 2-week cycle, I would say Monday to, you know, if you could take a week off from Monday to Friday, take a week off work, but maybe go back on around the 8th. I think that would be really great, you know, so like really take some time off, because these 4 days, the 30th to 3rd of July, are calmer. They're times to sort of like decompress a little bit and to maybe potter around and just do what is feeling kind of nice. And then, you know, we've got this highly intense weekend where we're really feeling into a sense of change, a sense of new ways of relating to people. And there's a lot of strength in that. We all need to feel like we're part of something. I think, you know, maybe there's a new way that we belong to each other. You know, I do think we, and I put myself in this, I think there's a lot of people who have felt like they don't know where they fit into society. They don't know where they fit into the world right now, especially if the world feels like it's breaking down and it's not making the same sense as it usually does. And so we might think, well, how do I belong here right now? And so I really see this Venus conjunct Uranus is all about a new way of relating to ourselves, so that we are not so worried about the changes going on around us. And then we come into the time of the full moon in Capricorn, which I said is really quite strong. And let me just show you that chart now. So it's slightly out of focus. I don't know, but I'm gonna I'm gonna carry on, because I think you can see this. Hopefully you can. It looks better like that. Okay, so you've got the sun and the moon at 18 degrees of their respective signs. So the full moon is in the sign of Capricorn. So if you've got, you know, if you're born say from the 7th to the 13th, this full of July, that is, if you're born you know, the 7th to the 13th of July, and also let's also say January as well, then this full moon is likely to be activating your own internal sun. Or if you've got your moon in the cardinal signs around these mid degrees, you may well feel very sort of activated by this. But this opposition, you can see here, they're in a square to Chiron down here. So first of all, I mean, it's an interesting square, because Chiron is at 26 degrees and these are 18 degrees. And so on the day of the full moon, the moon is going to, obviously the moon is always moving. The moon is going to move into that, like leaning into that square. So as the day goes on the day of the full moon, the moon square Chiron is going to get more and more exact. It's applying. That's what we say. It's applying into that aspect. And so you may well feel a little bit more sensitive around that time, especially if you've got something going on between your moon and Chiron anyway. That will really bring out that sensitivity. And then, of course, the sun moves approximately a degree a day. And so as the moon... so the moon is making things a lot more sensitive. And then beyond the 10th of July, leading into, I don't know, maybe the 15th of July or so, you'll see that the sun is coming more and more into that square. It's also applying into this square with Chiron. So whatever is felt at the time of the full moon in Capricorn at the end of this 2-week period, I would still say there's some soreness and sensitivity that continues. Now, you know, at the start, I did say it was also an invitation to become your own coach, your own boss, and to be there to help support people around you. You know, Chiron, yes, he might feel vulnerable, but he was a teacher. Like Chiron was a coach, a master. He was a very important character in mythology. You know, Chiron was there to really help heal the wounds of other people and the insecurities of other people. So, you know, what I would say in this 2-week period, anything that's coming up for you, and I always say healing, and I'm nearly always referring to it as emotional healing. But it's also physical healing. You know, when I've had an illness, it's nearly always sort of come at a time when there's a lot of Chiron going on. I mean, my body's going through lots of changes right now. I've just had my Chiron return, which happens around, the age of 49 to 51. And so, Chiron based things can bring out a latent illness. So if you're aware of a tendency that you have, if you have a tendency to things that are caused by like it starts off as an emotion and it builds, then I would, if I was in your shoes, I think I would start to take necessary precautions. So for instance, and your idea of health and my idea of health may well be very, very different. But I'm a huge fan of homeopathy, and I'm also a massive fan of German new medicine. And German new medicine, which in some circles is said to be completely discredited, but I tend to believe that lots of things that get discredited may well be discredited for the wrong reasons. Like it might actually hold water, and other people are saying, oh my God, if that's really true, that's going to challenge everything that we know about medicine. And I happen to think that might be the way it is, but it's not for me to say that here necessarily. But with German new medicine, they talk about how, and like Louise Hay and other people who've spoken about the connections between your emotions and the physical. This is, if you like that thing, you're leaning against an open door with German new medicine. So for instance, one thing that I have suffered in the past, until I really got to the bottom of it, was persistent cystitis and water infections and things, which when we've got the sun in Cancer and a big full moon, can definitely bring up these more watery type things. But anyway, I always thought, oh, it's cystitis, it's obviously a bacterial thing, it's obviously this and this, and the only way to get rid of it is probably antibiotics. And that's how I was for years and years and years. More recently, when I learned about German new medicine, when we feel like that our boundaries aren't secure, if you look at all mammals and things, they have a reaction, they mark their territory. So there's like German new medicine talks about territorial issues, so so like when you feel threatened, when you feel like you don't have your own sovereign space, you may well be a lot more it might be a lot more it might be a precursor to a water infection. And when I actually trace back some of my biggest ones, there've been times when I'd gone back home and was living with my parents, or I had people visiting, possibly people I was a bit uncomfortable with. So it's worth having a look at the emotional and physical connections. So, and that's why I'm sharing my horribly embarrassing story there. But I just think, when we can share and learn from each other, I think it's helpful. So the moon moving into this Chiron is really showing that sort of emotional connection, because the moon is very much about the psyche and the sun is very much about our personality. But you could also say your physical body that you're in, so the sun and Chiron, I'm seeing the emotions here working with Chiron, and then I'm seeing the body working with Chiron. So if you've created this emotional situation for yourself, how do what can you do to make sure it doesn't manifest into something? So I hope that's helpful. And this is the first full moon where Uranus has just, this is the first full moon that we know in our lifetime, unless you're born back in 1941 or 42. And I don't have many viewers who are in that age range, but this is our first full moon in, with Uranus in the sign of Gemini. And the fact that it's just changed a couple of days before, I just think makes it so much stronger. The energies are still settling down. So I think this could be quite surprising for us. I love the fact that Venus is still close by. I think these two make a lovely connection. I think they make a nice couple. It's really quite exciting. Friendships and relationships can be exciting around this time. Venus is also applying into a square with Mars. She's had quite a nice run with Mars in the last, month or so. Venus and Mars have been kind of moving together in more of a trine. We've been quite balanced between the male and the female. It feels like it's time for us to take a stand a little bit more, which I think is going to be interesting. And we've also got, you'll see here that Pluto and Uranus, we've got this Saturn and Neptune, in particular Saturn, right at the midpoint, exactly at the midpoint between Pluto and Uranus. And this has I think, a really strong meaning. I'm going to talk more about this in the full moon in Capricorn video, because I really want to go into that particular midpoint. It's super strong. During this time as well, Jupiter is separating from the Saturn and Neptune square. So you might find that some of these tensions that have been building up, if you relate to that particular square, if you've got a Jupiter and Saturn square or an aspect between the two of them in your birth chart, you may well be feeling this. They were in a square from August, on and off from August last year, and they just went into the exact square last week. Now it's starting to ease off now, which is great, but I often find that when things really start to ease off, we start to unravel all the things that had been raveling up at that time. So I think, all is well, really. The tension we have been holding, I think it's reached fever pitch already, and now is the unraveling. It's how we make sense of it and how we integrate it. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. So there you go. That's my little whistle stop tour during this particular time, from the 25th of June to the 10th of July. I hope that was useful. Stick around, like listening to your sun sign and your ascendant sign, if that suits you. I use a whole sign Western tropical model when I do my forecasts, but then they will be drilling down much more cleanly into your energy. So hopefully that'll be helpful. So anyway, have a great one and catch you real soon. Bye for now.